Brett teaches Raspberry Pi.
Brett teaches Raspberry Pi.
Brett.
Tech is cool. T-minus 5 seconds.
Brett teaches Raspberry Pi.
Okay, we're ready to start writing some code that uses that sense hat. So we're going to go ahead and the first thing we're going to do is create a new file in order to do all this new coding in. We're going to leave this one behind, so click the green plus new up there, and this should create a new tab for you. Our first big thing that we're going to use is called a library. Now, when you think of a library, you think of like a big building with lots of books written by lots of people with tons of knowledge in them that you can learn from and use as long as you check them out. So libraries and code are basically the same thing. They're big collections of code that other developers have written, and we're going to borrow that code so that we don't have to write it ourselves or duplicate code and utilize it in our code by checking it out and utilizing it on our side. So we're going to go ahead and use a library called sense hat. It's sense_hat. In order to use this, we're going to start with the keyword from, and then we're going to say sense_hat. That's our library. And then the book we're going to want to use is called, we're going to import it. We're going to say import capital sense capital H hat. That is the sort of book or the collection of code we're interested in that sense hat library. Now in programming, we use one very important term called a variable. Now you're probably familiar with using variables in math class, where you would do like x equals 5, where x is a variable. And then it would say like find y. Now y is unknown to us until we solve the problem. X, every time we see x, we assume it's a 5. That's exactly how a variable works in programming. We create a variable to store a specific set of information. It can be as simple as a number, or it can be more complex as, say, in a complete collection of numbers. So we're going to go ahead and use that in our code. In our case, using that same library book analogy, we're going to store that book that we're checking out, or that collection of code called sensehat, in a variable that we can use in our code going forward. So the first thing we're going to type here is sense, lowercase sense. This is our variable name, and we're going to assign that equal to sensehat, which is that book we did up there with 2 parentheses. So this creates a variable called sense that holds the code we just borrowed from that library called capital sense, capital hat, that we can use in our code. This collection of code just lets us do all kinds of things with the sensehat. So now we're going to create our first line here, which is we're going to access that book and look for a specific chapter to clear the RGB out of there. So we're going to type sense.clear with 2 parentheses here. This looks for the code in that book that essentially clears out that RGB screen on our Pi. So think of that clear, like I said, like a chapter in that book. Keep sticking with that analogy. We're going to that specific chapter called clear, and we're executing any code within that chapter. So that's what the parentheses are. It says go find the clear method or a function of code in this collection of code and execute it. And we're going to need to write some code that loops over and over. And in our case, we're going to use a while loop in Python. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to type the word while. And then after that, we have to give it a condition. We're going to type true with a capital T followed by a colon. This says basically loop forever. Notice when you enter, it's tabbed in there. All code in Python is based on tabs, so anything tabbed in belongs to that while loop. Think of it as like a block of code. If we ever were to tab back to the left side, it would exit the while loop. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump in and grab another chapter in that book. We're going to use a sense.show_message. This is similar to that print we did before where we were printing hello world to that bottom white box. Instead, we're going to print it to the sense hat this time. So we're telling sense.showMessage inside parentheses and quotation marks hello world, and we're going to leave it at that. And this will show a message across the screen and it'll scroll it. And so we're going to go ahead and save it this time. Make sure you save it out. We're going to call this one ticker.py. Make sure once again you put the py saying it's Python code. Hit OK. And then we should be able to run this. Let's go look at what this did.
All right, so let's see the sense hat at work now.
Absolutely. So we got our ticker written. Let's go ahead and run it and see what it does. We're going to go hit run in the code and let it push out to the Raspberry Pi. Look at that.
Hello world. Classic first line of code.
It sure is. Let's move on to the next part.